Well, hello and welcome back to Read Becca for another week in reading. I did make it through some books this week, despite all of the pressures against it. So I had some wonderful reading, but first I want to start by sharing something I heard from an author this week that was wonderful. The gist of it, I don't remember verbatim, but it was that books should be a door, not a mirror. And I love that sentiment. I definitely so often see, especially in the fantasy world, where people are looking to, self-insert and feel some escapism by seeing themselves mirrored back in the story and having a character that they individually can relate to. And I think that's possible in the doorway metaphor as well. But using books as a door into others' experiences and lives is so much more. It expands the world of books for you if you're not just seeking out yourself and representations of yourself in books. And I loved hearing that quote. It is perfect for my reading philosophy. So I just wanted to share that, and this week I did read into some doors into other people's lives. Firstly, of course, with a memoir, appropriately. And that memoir was Once Upon a Tome by Oliver Darkshire, The Misadventures of a Rare Bookseller. And this memoir was wonderful. It was a delight. This is so nicely written in a way that it just will warm your heart. This is cozy nonfiction, if there is such a thing, and every element of it was just perfect for the moment for me. This does not recount anything about exciting discoveries of rare books. There's no unearthing tomes that soar to the heights, or the wealth and riches behind rare book selling. No, that's not this book. This book is much more about the mundanity of working in a dusty shop filled with books that are constantly beset by just the atmosphere that they exist in, and these booksellers trying to keep them together, keep them from getting damaged, and the quirky individuals both in the shop and those who come and go as customers. And it does that without being exploitative of the oddities of the customers, while also engaging in the humorous aspect that these people do have their quirks and unusualities. So I loved everything about this. This is just delightfully charming in every way, and it's so bookish. So I just want to read a little bit so you can get a taste of the tone of this, because I could literally open to any page and give you this heartwarming feeling. Given the general irritation that most casual customers pose, you might wonder why booksellers ever open their doors at all. The reason is collectors. Like an ugly duckling morphing into a golden goose, sometimes a casual browser will evolve into a book collector. It's impossible to say what catalyzes this change. Some primal magpie-adjacent urge begins to burn under the surface, and one dark day they make a simple choice whence there is no return. They purchase an old book. It might seem innocuous, but this is the first in 39 ineluctable steps toward being a 90-year-old hermit in a house full of books, complaining that your ungrateful children do not appreciate your library. Long, sleepless nights as a bookseller are spent trying to figure out what causes the transformation from one state to another, but the mystery as yet remains unsolved. Be that as it may, collectors provide the vast majority of bookshop revenue, because they are absolutely insatiable. Under the banner of book collector, you'll find a host of strange and wonderful people, united by their obsession with acquiring and sitting on a hoard of papery treasures. So everything about this was really just enjoyable to read. I want to seek out the audiobook and see if Darkshire himself reads it, because I definitely want to listen to see just the voice behind this. The one thing that I would say was maybe a detractor for me on this is that he doesn't get too personal. We are hearing very much his personal account of him becoming an apprentice at Sotheran's, a rare bookshop, and how he found his way there and sort of worked up the ranks a bit, even though I don't think he ever really gets a clear promotion there. He sort of moves into doing more strenuous jobs, I guess. But he doesn't let us into his personal life that much. There are a couple moments where he talks about coming out at work and his husband and things like that, where I wish we had gotten more of that, but I think there is room to expand and perhaps continue as a memoirist from here. So I didn't terribly mind it, and it's not super long, so there wouldn't have been too much room to expand this, I think, if you wanted to keep it a small, tiny little tome. But this was just wonderful. I think anyone who loves books would have a great time with this one. Then I read Thorn Hedge by T. Kingfisher, who is apparently BookTube's favorite author. This is the newest of her work, and thankfully that she's now super popular. My library picked up several of her previous books that were indie or self-published that weren't in their catalog before, so I have even more access to her stuff. So that is very exciting. But this one, everyone talks about this one as a Sleeping Beauty retelling, and it is that. I mean, you can tell from the cover, the brambles clearly are there, the vibe is there, but it's even more so a Changeling myth retelling. So it's bringing those two things together in order to tell this cohesive story, albeit short. And we are following an unusual character, Toadling, who is a human. She is the human on the other side of a Changeling story. So she was taken as a baby before she'd ever had mother's milk, so she has grown up on fairy pond water and raw fish, and that has made her a little unusual, supposedly. And she can transform into a toad, and quite often does. So she is a person who doesn't quite fit, and I love that aspect to tying into this Changeling story. What I'm not sure I totally love, or what I have some reservations about, is that this engages with the Changeling myth very well, but also there's real world context to Changeling myths, and I can't totally separate myself from that real world context and how I'm thinking about things. So in the real world context, we have the idea of Changeling myths being born out of parents trying to process their non-neurotypical children and feeling like, well, my child was this perfect, ideal child, just yesterday, and all of a sudden they're completely different. They are not behaving the way they're supposed to. That sort of thing, and that's obviously not great. So I think this is coming from a great place in terms of looking at Changeling myths, but is not really engaging with that real world context. And so there are things up in the air. And knowing T. Kingfisher's work, I think that she's done a great job of handling the myths, but has separated from the real world context. However, looking at this from the real world context, I do kind of have to have that itching in the back of my brain over the fact that the fairy that gets put in her place with her family is very clearly evil, is incredibly evil. And so most of this book is her spending her time worrying over this fairy that's in her place. That's very evil, obviously. So I think from that evil fairy aspect, there is an important message to the story about just simply trusting your gut or trusting your intuitions and doing the hard thing yourself, going out on the limb maybe, when you think you know what's right. And I think getting into that more would be spoilery, but I do want to do briefly a couple of spoilers. So going into spoilers about that evil fairy aspect, I would say that she is grappling with the idea of this evil fairy in her place, and she feels like she has screwed up, when in reality she has all the tools she needs to protect everyone from this horrible situation. She knows how bad it is, but she maybe doesn't step forward and do it. She keeps trying to support other people in doing the hard thing and taking care of this threat to everyone, but she doesn't actually step in and do it herself. And so I think that's maybe part of the message here. There is also the aspect of the very ending where she doesn't end up back with her human family. She winds up in the pond with the fairies, and she's so loved and accepted there that I do think there is kind of topically a commentary on maybe her being neurodivergent and fitting and being othered, but being right with othered people. So I really love that aspect because she's such an unusual character, and I think Toadling just stole my heart, and I really, really loved her as a character. She's so kind and caring throughout this. That is a strong thread through all of T. Kingfisher's books, that all of the characters she writes as protagonists really deeply care about things, and that was what pulled me through Toadling's story here. So I just adored this. This was great. It wasn't super substantial or even memorable, but I always am delighted to enjoy another T. Kingfisher book. Next, I read The Unspoken Name by A.K. Larkwood, and this is for October. This was on my TBR this year, and quite happily, this has been on my TBR for multiple years, on my to-read shelf for the year. And it's finally off. And I'm so delighted because this was a really great read, and it's a duology, I believe, with the second book out recently, I think less than a year ago, or right about a year ago now. And so I'm excited to jump in because I do feel this just started finding its footing as I was getting toward the end. So this was a debut, and I think that in part led to the beginning feeling a bit slow to build. So this is the story of Sorway, who is a priestess for the Unspoken, or the House of Silence is where she is. So we have a lot of factions like this. The Unspoken is kind of a wholly religious faction, and there are a number of others brought up. So there's a lot of world building to this, but she, in her role as the priestess, is going to die for her religion, basically. That is destined. But one day a dark, shadowy figure comes in, and as a part of that, she prophesies things. And she sees a prophecy of this supposedly lost item that's very fantastical and mythic, and it completely shakes things up. What does it mean for, the shadowy figure to be coming here, and this item that was thought didn't exist anymore is actually out there? So naturally, she winds up taking off. She leaves her duty and goes on this epic quest journey sort of deal. And it's a little bit back and forth, like they're not just on a steady line, straightforward type of journey. It's, okay, well now we're going over here, and now we're going over here. And that gets old a little bit in the first part, I think, but then as you start to understand where things are going in the back half, I really finally started to get a lot to grab onto. There was so much about the world building that I love, and yet it is so nebulous. I think at one point we're talking about this sort of epic maze, and somebody mentions how things kind of go wonky in your memories in the maze, and that's how it felt reading through that section, because it was like, there's nothing for me to grab onto. I don't know if these things are literal or figurative that are happening, if they're dreams or if they're actual. So there were a lot of moments like that. I'm going to skip over one line with names that's not relevant, but otherwise this is intact. 3 white canopies moved under an arch of ancient stone, like seabirds returning. The shadow of the maze ship Irwa rippled across the blanket of fog below as she passed. The air of this world was chilly and full of dust. It tasted like salt on the tongue. She should really have been used to the cold by now, but she kept thinking about her library back in the House of Silence. That had been the last time she had really been warm. So I really like the prose and descriptiveness of this, but it feels very ethereal and intangible for sure. And one of the only things I could even begin to liken this to is the Locktomb series. This is much more dark and serious, I think, a little bit more steady and less dynamic, I think, than the Locktomb series. It does have snark, for sure. It is really like a dark story, dark setting. There's some necromancy mentioned. And the magic is certainly also a bit nebulous, but present. And it certainly has a similar vibe to the Locktomb series. I think most similarly to Harrow, because that one, you don't really know what's going on for most of it. And then you kind of get a few breadcrumbs here and there, especially toward the end. So this has that dark sense of humor. It has some sapphic elements that are not dominant. So that certainly is another familiarity. And there's a lot of cruelty, but also sort of an uncaringness in that cruelty. There's so much violence because of this religion sort of valuing the desecration of one's body. And so there's a lot of that, but it's just sort of people going in expecting that they're going to face physical harm or even do physical harm to themselves. So certainly self-harm is very prominent here. But it doesn't feel gratuitous. So throughout this, you can understand motivations behind what a lot of what is happening, and it never feels like people are going out of their way to like torture someone or like be overly descriptive graphic violence on the page is pretty low, actually, despite the fact that this is a really, really darkly fantastical book with a lot of physical violence to it. So I have heard people describe this so many times and could not tell you what it was really about, and so now that I have read it, I once again am in that position myself, because I couldn't really tell you what the goal is or the intent is. There's a lot of really wonderful character interactions with people, but I don't want to spoil that because so many of those do have major spoilers in who they are. Sorway winds up in sort of a servant position for a huge part of this, and as an orc, as a former priestess, she is also an outcast, and she doesn't quite fit, or she's in contention with a lot of people that they encounter. And so the interpersonal dynamics here are really, really strong. I feel like everyone was characterized really well, and as I said earlier, there's some banter. I like Sorway's personality, and the way that she bounces off of other people that she's with, depending on who they are, is really, really great. So I feel like this had so much for me in terms of being a standout debut. I wish I had gotten to it sooner, and I'm really, really excited to see what the second book holds, because this was just a great time. That is what I finished in print, and then in ebook, I also wrapped up the novelette. I think it's only 40 pages, so not quite a novella, I don't think. Bump in Boohail by Kimberly Lemming. This is from the Mead Mishaps series, and it is a very short, little romantic short story following the couple from the first novel in the Mead Mishaps. And this is following Cinnamon as she and the village are preparing for Samhain celebrations. So very, very seasonal, obviously, that's why I wanted to get to it. Cinnamon is a delightful character. We also do see Bree, her best friend, who I believe is the main character of the second book, but very much in the background. And Cinnamon has also just returned from her honeymoon with her mate from the first book. And I won't mention who that is, because obviously that would be a spoiler, but she is doing all these nice, cozy, wonderful preparations for what sounds like a delightful festival. And meanwhile, her husband is off, holed up at home at their house, doing some strange preparations, and he seems to rather delight in frightening her. So this had such a wonderful balance of really cozy and just a little bit spooky. Like, none of the spooky stuff for me was actually scary. Like, you can tell it's being contrived, but it had that great balance. And then sandwiched in the middle was a very, very steamy scene. So Kimberly Lemming's books that I've read so far do definitely go at the very far end of the spice scale. So if you want fully explicit, really fun, comedic, this is definitely humorous fantasy romance. Great, great novelette. I had a wonderful time with it. So I have really enjoyed this series, and I'm looking forward to getting back to the second novel, because I've read a couple of the other things here. So yeah, that was a fun one, and I'm hoping to get to the novel next month. Then, what am I reading? So I'm still reading several things. I'm still working heavily on Empress of Forever and Distant Gardens. I'm halfway through, thank goodness. And I am also starting The Vaster Wilds by Lauren Groff today. So those are, I think, the books. Oh, audiobook. I am also reading The True Bastards by Jonathan French, the second in the Lotlands trilogy. So that is in progress. I'm a little over the halfway point, and it's been great so far. So that's all the reading stuff. On to other stuff. So watching, it was a terrible week. I'll start with my week, I guess. So I was sick last week, and things really just went downhill from there. I didn't get worse as far as being sick, but the brain fog was real. I could not function mentally. So Once Upon a Tome was actually perfect, because it's short anecdotes, being a memoir. So I could dip into a single anecdote and have that be like all I read for the day, because I was barely reading for an entire week. So I think Wednesday night, things finally started to clear up, and my reading has just shot off like a rocket, quite a bit better. I think also having new glasses has helped immensely with my reading. I'm rather suspecting that that was a major problem that I did not realize, because I did just recently get a couple of new pairs of glasses, and there was a very significant prescription change. So I had been really struggling with reading and feeling like my focus was terrible. That was what I was blaming. And I think my focus was terrible because I couldn't actually see very well, and I didn't know it. So I think that has done wonders now that my brain is sort of in place again. So reading has been good. But that brain fog and lack of being able to read very much meant I did watch a ridiculous amount of dumb reality shows. I have been watching Love Island UK, the latest season, I think season 10, for a while. And Love Island is crazy because they have an episode a day, basically. And so this season has 60 episodes. So I've been slowly working through that, but I made a lot more progress toward finishing it than usual this past week. And I also randomly decided to start Survivor. Just saw a season on, I think, Netflix, and just watched through an entire season. I think season 32, Brains, Brawn, and Beauty 2.0 was what that one was. So there is another season. There are only 2 seasons, very random, on Netflix, and so I'm in the second season that was available there. So random weird Survivor seasons. And I enjoyed it very much, but it is terrible to watch. Watching it, I was like, these people are awful to each other mostly. And you do kind of attach to the few people who are not being awful the whole time, of course. So I wish they could see each other and tell the people that are not being awful. But that's part of the game, I guess. So I used to be a huge Survivor fan when it first started, like when it was very first running, probably for the first 8 or 10 years. That was around when I was in college. So I was really into it when it was running and have completely lost touch with it. I don't think I've even heard about any recent seasons in years. So this was interesting to kind of look back and see. I think other than that, very quiet week because I was not doing well. Made some small progress on kitchen renovation stuff. I'm getting things nailed down. I have already locked that in, so I'm dealing with a contractor now and everything. And yeah, it's been a process. I'm trying to get a dishwasher now, or decide on a dishwasher now, and I'm so non-picky that I don't even know what I'm looking for. So we will see how that goes, but it is a long way off because everything you do with a contractor right now is endlessly backed up. So that is my big week, was just getting all of that organized and being an adult, unfortunately. So I think that's it for me today for this week. Hopefully we will be on to much better reading times in the coming week, but I had great books this week, regardless of my reading abilities. So we will see how things go for the next week. And thank you so very much for watching.